Sign the documents before you leave for your vacation. Right here.
Pack out before I come back from the vacation because I will be coming back with a new wife. I don't want you again.
How much are you willing to pay for the house? We need to close this deal before my husband comes back.
I'm back from the vacation with a new wife. You need to pack and leave.
Her husband returned from vacation with his new lover, unaware his wife had sold the house and the family company. He couldn't speak. She wouldn't answer. The door wouldn't open. The accounts were frozen. The company was gone. 3 weeks ago, he left for vacation with his girlfriend, posting photos online, planning to replace his wife and keep everything they built together. But his wife wasn't the woman he thought she was. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't fight. She just waited until he was gone, then systematically dismantled every piece of a life he thought he controlled. The house? Sold. The cars? Gone. The business he bragged about? Dissolved. Every account with his name? Locked. And when he finally came home, standing on that porch with his mistress beside him, holding keys that no longer worked, staring at a house that was no longer his, he realized something that broke him completely. He never had any of it. It was always hers. And now, she was gone. What happened next changed everything. Before we continue, I need to tell you something. Creating these stories takes days of research, writing, and production. But here's the truth. 99% of people watching right now aren't subscribed. If this story is already making you feel something, if you're curious about what happens next, then please, take just 2 seconds to hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing, but it helps us bring you more stories like this. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Are you in the US? Canada? Australia? Somewhere else? Let us know. Because knowing you're there, that you care about these stories, that's what keeps us going. Now, let's get back to how it all started. Vivian Carlisle made one critical mistake in her life, and it wasn't falling in love. It was believing that love could transform a man who had nothing into a partner worthy of everything she built. She met Julian Hart on a cold November evening at a networking gala, the kind of event where everyone dressed in expensive suits and exchanged business cards like currency. Julian stood near the bar, surrounded by a small crowd, telling stories that sounded impressive but carried no substance. He had no money, no business, no real achievements. Just charm. The kind of charm that made people lean in, laugh at his jokes, and forget to ask what he actually did for a living. Vivian watched him from across the room, intrigued not by what he said, but by how effortlessly he commanded attention. She was tired of building alone, tired of carrying the weight of her empire without someone to share it with. So when Julian turned and locked eyes with her, flashing that confident smile, she walked over and introduced herself. That single decision would cost her everything she spent years creating. Within weeks, Julian was in her life completely. Within months, he was in her bed, whispering promises about their future together. Within a year, his name was on every document she owned. Vivian wasn't stupid. She was strategic, disciplined, someone who turned failing ventures into profitable machines while others were still drafting business plans. She owned a thriving consulting firm, investment properties in 3 states, and a portfolio most people twice her age couldn't imagine. But she wanted more than wealth. She wanted partnership. She wanted to build something with someone, not just for someone. Julian seemed like the perfect candidate. He talked about ambition like he understood it. He spoke about vision like he had one. And he looked at Vivian like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. So she made a choice that horrified everyone around her. She brought him into her world, signed his name beside hers on properties, added him to business accounts, and listed him as co-owner of companies she built with her own hands. Her family was furious. Her closest friends cornered her at dinner parties, voices low and urgent. Vivian, he has nothing. What happens when this falls apart? But Vivian didn't listen. She believed in the power of partnership, in the idea that 2 people committed to the same dream could create something extraordinary. She wasn't naive. She was hopeful. And hope, as she would soon discover, is the most expensive currency in the world. Julian thrived in his new life. He attended investor meetings, shook hands with powerful people, and posted photos of luxury cars and penthouse views on social media. Everyone praised him. Articles called him a self-made success. Interviewers asked about his journey from nothing to everything. Julian absorbed every word, his chest swelling with pride, his confidence growing with each compliment. But the truth was buried beneath the surface, invisible to everyone but Vivian. While Julian traveled to conferences and business trips, Vivian stayed behind closing deals, negotiating contracts, managing employees, and turning struggling ventures into profitable empires. Julian's name was on everything, but Vivian's intelligence built everything. He was the face. She was the engine. And for a while, that dynamic worked. Vivian didn't need recognition. She didn't crave applause. She just needed him to be present, to show up, to meet her halfway in the life they were building together. But Julian was never good at showing up. He was too busy enjoying the life she created, too comfortable taking credit for work he never did, too distracted by the attention he received to notice the woman quietly holding everything together behind him. Then Vivian started asking for something Julian wasn't willing to give. "I want to start a family," she said one evening as they sat in their living room, the city lights glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Julian didn't even look up from his phone. "Not now, Vivian. We're building something big. A baby would complicate things." She tried again a few months later, this time over dinner at the restaurant where he proposed. "I'm ready, Julian. I want us to have a child. I want to build a family, not just a business." He set down his wine glass, his expression somewhere between boredom and irritation. "You always want something, don't you? Can't you just be happy with what we have?" The words landed like a slap, quiet and sharp. Vivian didn't respond. She smiled, nodded, and let the conversation die. But something inside her shifted that night. She stopped asking. She stopped expecting. And she started watching. Julian's trips became longer, his explanations vague. Business meeting in Miami. Investor conference in Vegas. Networking event in the Bahamas. Vivian didn't question him. She trusted him. Or, at least, she wanted to believe she still could. Then, the photos started appearing. Julian's Instagram, which usually featured motivational quotes and business updates, suddenly filled with images of a woman. Young, beautiful, laughing beside him on tropical beaches. Vivian recognized her immediately. Julian's ex-girlfriend. The one he swore was a closed chapter, a mistake from his past he'd outgrown. But there she was, her hand resting on his chest in one photo, her head on his shoulder in another, a champagne glass raised in a third with a caption that read, "Be ready. The future is coming." Vivian stared at her phone, her heart pounding, her mind racing through 1,000 emotions at once. Anger, humiliation, betrayal. But she didn't call him. She didn't scream or send angry messages demanding explanations. Something deeper than emotion took over. Instinct, strategy, survival. Vivian knew that reacting emotionally would hand Julian exactly what he wanted. Control, the upper hand, the satisfaction of knowing he'd broken her. So instead, she did something far more dangerous. She logged into his accounts. Every single one. Email, messages, cloud storage, social media. Julian had always been careless with passwords, reusing the same combinations, saving logins on shared devices. He never suspected Vivian would look. Why would she? She trusted him. Or at least, that's what he believed. What Vivian found in those accounts didn't just break her heart. It changed her completely. Messages between Julian and his ex, hundreds of them, planning a future that didn't include Vivian at all. "She's boring," Julian wrote in one message. "Predictable. She just works all the time. You're everything she's not." Another message, sent late at night while Vivian was asleep in their bed. "Once I'm done with her, we'll have everything. The houses, the cars, the business, the accounts. She won't fight it. She never fights. She'll just accept it and move on." There were voice notes too. Julian's voice, casual and confident, laughing as he described how easy it would be to bring his ex back home, How Vivian wouldn't see it coming. How she didn't deserve the wealth they built together because she was too focused on work to enjoy life. Vivian listened to every word. She read every message. She didn't cry. She didn't break down. She just sat there in the dark, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating her face, her mind shifting from heartbreak to calculation. Julian wasn't her partner. He never was. He was a thief. A parasite who fed off her work, her intelligence, her patience, and now he was preparing to discard her while keeping everything she built. But here's the thing Julian didn't understand about Vivian. She didn't react. She planned. And when a woman like Vivian starts planning, the only question left isn't if she'll win. It's how much he'll lose before he realizes what he's done. She closed the laptop, her face calm, her hands steady, her heart cold. Julian had no idea what was coming. He thought she was weak, easy to control, someone who would cry and beg and fall apart when he finally revealed his plan. He had no idea that the woman he underestimated was about to dismantle his entire world with the same precision she used to build it. Because Vivian didn't just build empires. She knew exactly how to destroy them too. And Julian was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Would you have confronted him immediately? Or would you have stayed silent and planned your revenge? The cracks didn't appear overnight. They formed slowly, like hairline fractures in glass that spread wider with every careless touch. At first, Vivian convinced herself she was imagining things. Julian's coldness when she mentioned starting a family. His dismissive tone when she suggested they spend more time together. The way he scrolled through his phone during dinner, barely acknowledging her presence. These were small things, easy to rationalize, easy to forgive. But small things have a way of adding up. And by the time Vivian realized how deep the cracks ran, they had already shattered the foundation of everything she believed about their marriage. Julian's cruelty wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, calculated, delivered with a smile that made her question whether she had any right to feel hurt at all. "Not now, Vivian," he'd say whenever she brought up the idea of children, his voice light but firm, as if she were a child asking for something unreasonable. "We're building an empire. A baby would ruin everything we've worked for." The irony of that statement wasn't lost on her. Everything they'd worked for. As if Julian had done anything more than show up and take credit. One evening, Vivian made dinner, something she rarely had time for anymore. She set the table, lit candles, poured wine, and waited for Julian to come home. He arrived 2 hours late, smelling like expensive cologne and someone else's perfume. "Sorry, babe. Investor meetings ran long," he said, barely glancing at the table she'd prepared. He grabbed a plate, loaded it with food, and sat on the couch, turning on the television. Vivian stood in the doorway, watching him, her hands clenched at her sides. "Julian, I made dinner. I thought we could eat together." He didn't look up. "I'm eating, aren't I?" She walked over and sat beside him, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "I want to talk about us. About our future." Julian sighed, the kind of sigh that made her feel like she was an inconvenience. "What's there to talk about?" "We're fine, Vivian. You worry too much." She pressed on, her voice steady. "I'm not getting any younger, Julian. If we want to have children, we need to start planning." He finally looked at her, his eyes cold and detached. "Why are you so obsessed with this? You have everything. A business, money, freedom. Why would you want to throw that away for diapers and sleepless nights?" Vivian felt something crack inside her, but she didn't let it show. "Because I want a family. I want something real with you, not just business accounts and properties." Julian laughed, short and bitter. "You want real? This is real, Vivian. This life we have. Stop trying to complicate it." He turned back to the television, and the conversation was over. Vivian sat there for a moment, staring at the side of his face, realizing that the man she married wasn't the man sitting beside her. Or maybe he always was, and she just refused to see it. Julian's trips became more frequent, his excuses more transparent. Business in Los Angeles. Meeting investors in New York. Networking in Miami. Each time he left, he posted photos online, and each time, Vivian noticed something new. The way he smiled in those pictures, genuine and relaxed, nothing like the strained expression he wore at home. The expensive restaurants he visited, the luxury hotels he stayed in, the parties he attended. And then, the woman. She appeared gradually, first in the background of group photos, then standing beside him, then holding his hand. Julian's ex-girlfriend. The one he claimed meant nothing. Vivian didn't confront him. She watched. She observed. She cataloged every image, every caption, every comment left by strangers congratulating him on his success, his charm, his perfect life. One photo in particular made her stomach turn. Julian and the woman on a beach at sunset, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist. The caption read, "Sometimes the best things come back around." Vivian stared at that photo for a long time, her mind racing. Was this a message meant for her? Was Julian so confident in his control that he didn't care if she saw? Or was he testing her, waiting to see how long she'd tolerate his disrespect before finally breaking? She didn't break. Instead, she did something Julian never expected. She stayed calm. She smiled when he came home. She asked about his trips, nodding along as he spun elaborate lies about meetings and deals that never happened. She played the role of a patient, understanding wife, all while her mind worked in the background, processing information, forming strategies, preparing for a move Julian wouldn't see coming. One night, after Julian fell asleep, Vivian sat in the home office they shared and opened his laptop. She knew his password. He'd never bothered changing it, too arrogant to think she'd ever look. What she found was worse than she imagined. Messages between Julian and his ex, explicit and cruel, detailing a plan that made Vivian's blood run cold. "She's so focused on work. She doesn't even notice I'm gone half the time," Julian wrote. "It's pathetic, really. She built all this, and she doesn't even know how to enjoy it." His ex responded, "When are you bringing me home? I'm tired of sneaking around." Julian's reply came quickly. "Soon. I'm setting things up. Once everything's in place, I'll tell her it's over. She won't fight it. She never does. And the best part? Everything we built is in both our names. She can't touch it without my approval." Vivian read those words 3 times, each reading colder than the last. Julian wasn't just cheating. He was planning to humiliate her, discard her, and keep everything she worked for. He thought she was weak, predictable, someone who would accept betrayal without resistance. The next morning, Vivian woke up before Julian and made breakfast. She set a plate in front of him, poured his coffee, and kissed him on the cheek. "I love you," she said softly. Julian barely looked up from his phone. "Yeah, you too." Vivian walked away, her smile still in place, her heart now a block of ice. That day, she made a series of phone calls. Lawyers, accountants, financial advisors, people who specialized in untangling complicated assets and protecting wealth from those who didn't deserve it. She was meticulous, careful, asking questions in hypothetical terms, never revealing too much. If someone wanted to protect their assets in a divorce, what steps would they take? The answers she received were detailed and precise. Transfer ownership, liquidate joint accounts, freeze access, dissolve partnerships. Every step required documentation, signatures, legal authority. Vivian took notes, her mind working through the logistics, the timing, the execution. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She just planned. Because that's what builders do. They create. They strategize. And when necessary, they dismantle what no longer served them. Julian continued his trips, his posts, his affair, completely oblivious to the storm building around him. He'd come home, shower, change clothes, and leave again, offering half-hearted excuses Vivian no longer bothered to question. One evening, as he packed for another trip, Vivian stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching him. "Where are you going this time?" she asked, her tone casual. "Vegas. Big investor meeting. Could be a game changer for us." Julian zipped his suitcase and turned to her, flashing that confident smile she once found charming. "Don't worry, babe. I'll be back before you know it." Vivian nodded, her expression soft and understanding. "Have a safe trip, Julian. I'll be here when you get back." He kissed her on the forehead, grabbed his suitcase, and walked out the door. Vivian stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of his car pulling out of the driveway. Then she went to the office, opened her laptop, and continued the work she'd been doing for weeks. Transferring assets, closing accounts, consulting with lawyers, preparing documents. Every action was deliberate, every decision calculated. Julian thought he was in control. He thought Vivian was too weak, too focused on work, too afraid of confrontation to do anything about his betrayal. He had no idea that the woman he underestimated was about to pull the rug out from under him so completely, so thoroughly, that he'd never recover. And the best part? He wouldn't see it coming until it was already done. Vivian wasn't angry anymore. She was focused. And when a woman like Vivian focuses, empires fall. Would you have stayed silent and planned like Vivian, or confronted him the moment you found the messages? Julian's longest trip started on a Thursday morning in late spring. He packed 2 suitcases, far more than he'd ever taken for a business trip, and loaded them into the trunk of the car Vivian bought him. She stood on the front steps, arms crossed, watching him with a calmness that belied the storm building inside her. "How long will you be gone this time?" she asked. Julian didn't meet her eyes as he closed the trunk. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Big opportunity, babe. International investors. Could take the company global. Vivian nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "That's a long time." He walked over and kissed her cheek, the gesture mechanical, devoid of warmth. "You'll be fine. You always are. Besides, you'll be too busy running things to even notice I'm gone." The casual cruelty in those words didn't escape her, but she didn't react. She just smiled, soft and understanding, the way he expected her to. "Have a safe trip, Julian. I'll be here when you get back." He climbed into the car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. Vivian stood there until his car disappeared around the corner. Then she turned and walked back into the house. The moment the door closed behind her, her smile vanished. She pulled out her phone, opened Instagram, and waited. The first photo appeared within hours. Julian on a private jet, champagne glass raised, caption reading, "First class life. Here's to new beginnings." Vivian scrolled past it without emotion. The second photo came the next morning. Julian on a beach, the ocean stretching behind him, his ex-girlfriend beside him in a bikini, her hand resting on his chest. The caption read, "Paradise found." Vivian stared at that photo, her jaw clenched, her heart pounding. She zoomed in, studying every detail. The way his arm wrapped around her waist. The way she looked at him, adoring and possessive. The way he smiled, genuine and relaxed, nothing like the strained expression he wore at home. Comments flooded in. "You two look amazing together. Power couple vibes. So happy for you, Julian." Vivian read every single one, her mind cataloging the humiliation, the betrayal, the sheer audacity of a man who thought he could destroy her publicly while she stayed silent. But she didn't comment. She didn't call. She didn't send angry messages demanding explanations. She just watched and waited. The photos kept coming, each one more brazen than the last. Julian and his ex at an expensive restaurant, their hands intertwined across the table. Julian and his ex on a yacht, the sunset glowing behind them. Julian and his ex in matching robes at a luxury resort, the caption reading, "Be ready. The future is coming." That last caption felt like a message aimed directly at Vivian, a taunt designed to provoke a reaction. And for a moment, she almost gave him one. Her finger hovered over the call button, her breath shallow, her anger threatening to break through the calm she'd maintained for weeks. But then she stopped. She took a deep breath, set the phone down, and walked to the home office. If Julian wanted to send messages, she'd send one back. Not through words or confrontation, but through action. She opened his laptop, logged into his accounts using the passwords he'd carelessly saved, and began reading. Every message, every email, every hidden conversation he thought was private. What she found was worse than the photos. It was a detailed plan to dismantle her life while keeping everything she built. Julian's messages to his ex were frequent, explicit, and cruel. "She's so predictable," he wrote in one. "Works all day, comes home exhausted, falls asleep by 9. She doesn't even notice when I'm gone anymore. His ex responded, "When are you bringing me home? I'm tired of pretending this is just a vacation." Julian's reply was quick and confident. "Soon. I've already talked to a lawyer. Once I file for divorce, everything we own stays in my name." She signed documents years ago that she probably doesn't even remember. She trusted me with everything, and that's going to cost her. Vivian's hands trembled as she read those words, but she forced herself to keep going. Another message, sent late at night while she was asleep in their bed. "She doesn't deserve the life we built. She's boring and motionless. All she cares about is work. You're everything she's not. Fun, spontaneous, alive." His ex responded with a laughing emoji. "I can't wait to move into that house. Think she'll cry when you tell her?" Julian's response made Vivian's stomach turn. Probably. But she won't fight it. She never fights. She'll just accept it and move on like she always does. Vivian sat back in the chair, her mind racing through 1,000 thoughts at once. Julian wasn't just cheating. He was planning to humiliate her, take everything she worked for, and replace her with someone he thought was better. He believed she was weak, predictable, someone who would cry and accept defeat without resistance. But Julian had made one critical mistake. He underestimated the woman who built the empire he was trying to steal. Vivian closed the laptop, her face calm, her mind sharper than it had ever been. She picked up her phone and made the first call. "Hello, this is Vivian Carlisle. I need to speak with someone about asset protection and dissolution of joint ownership." The voice on the other end was professional and efficient. "We can help with that. When would you like to schedule a consultation?" Vivian glanced at the calendar on the wall, noting the dates Julian would be gone. "As soon as possible. I need this handled quickly and quietly." The consultation was scheduled for the next morning. Vivian spent the rest of the day compiling documents, account information, property deeds, and business contracts. Everything Julian thought was his was actually hers. She'd built it. She'd funded it. She'd signed the initial documents before his name ever appeared beside hers. And now, she was going to take it all back. The lawyer's office was sleek and modern, the kind of place where serious decisions were made behind closed doors. Vivian sat across from a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mrs. Carlisle, I've reviewed the documents you sent. You're in a strong position legally. Since you were the original owner of these assets, and your husband was added later as a co-signer, you have the authority to dissolve that arrangement." Vivian leaned forward, her voice steady and clear. "I want everything transferred back into my name only. The house, the cars, the business accounts, all of it." The lawyer nodded, making notes on a legal pad. "That's possible, but it requires his signature or a court order." Vivian's expression didn't change. "Can we expedite the process? I need this done before he returns from his trip." The lawyer studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "We can file for an emergency asset freeze based on suspected financial misconduct. If we can prove he's been mismanaging joint accounts or planning to liquidate assets without your consent, the court will grant a temporary order. Once that's in place, we can proceed with permanent transfers." Vivian pulled out her phone and opened the screenshots she'd taken of Julian's messages. "Will this be enough?" The lawyer read through them, her expression shifting from neutral to something closer to disgust. "This is more than enough. He's documented intent to defraud you of marital assets. We can use this to freeze everything immediately." Within 48 hours, the legal machinery was in motion. Account freezes, property transfers, business dissolution documents. Vivian signed everything with a calm precision that impressed even the lawyers handling her case. "You're one of the most prepared clients I've ever worked with," the lawyer said as they finalized the paperwork. Vivian smiled, thin and cold. "I've spent years building an empire. I know exactly how to dismantle one." While Julian posted photos of paradise, Vivian dismantled his entire life. The house was listed for sale, the transaction expedited through a cash buyer who wanted immediate possession. The cars were sold to private dealers who specialized in quick, discreet purchases. The family company, the one Julian bragged about in interviews and social media posts, was liquidated. Its assets transferred into accounts only Vivian could access. Every account tied to their joint names was frozen, pending legal review. Julian's credit cards stopped working. His access to bank accounts was revoked. His name was removed from property titles, business licenses, and investment portfolios. And through it all, Vivian remained calm, focused, and completely in control. The final photo Julian posted showed him and his ex on a balcony overlooking the ocean, the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The caption read, "The best is yet to come." Vivian stared at that photo, her expression unreadable, her heart now completely detached from the man she once loved. She typed a single comment under the photo, her first public acknowledgement of his betrayal. "Enjoy the view while it lasts." Then she blocked him on every platform, deleted his contact information, and turned off her phone. Julian would be home in a week, expecting to find his wife broken, submissive, ready to accept whatever humiliation he planned to deliver. Instead, he'd find nothing. No house, no cars, no company, no access, no control. Just the cold, undeniable reality that the woman he underestimated had destroyed him completely. And the best part? He still had no idea. Vivian sat back in her chair, staring at the documents spread across the desk, and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Julian thought he was building a future. He had no idea he was walking into his own ending. The week Julian spent in paradise was the week Vivian spent dismantling his entire existence. Every morning, she woke at 5, made coffee, and sat in the home office surrounded by documents that would destroy the man she once loved. There was no anger in her movements, no tears, no dramatic outbursts. Just cold, calculated precision. The kind of focus that turns ideas into action and action into irreversible consequences. Vivian had built an empire from nothing. And now she was using that same intelligence to erase Julian from it completely. The lawyers worked quickly, motivated by both her urgency and the clear evidence of Julian's intent to defraud her. "Mrs. Carlyle, the emergency asset freeze has been approved." Her lead attorney called to inform her on the third day. "All joint accounts are now locked pending your approval for any transactions. He won't be able to access a single dollar without a court order. And given the evidence you provided, no judge will grant that." Vivian's voice was steady, almost emotionless. "What about the properties?" The attorney's response was immediate. "The house sale closed this morning. The new owners take possession in 7 days. The cars have been sold, titles transferred. The business accounts are being liquidated as we speak, and all assets will be transferred into a trust under your sole control by the end of the week." Vivian thanked her and hung up, then stared at the calendar on the wall. Julian would be home in 4 days. 4 days to finish what she started. 4 days to make sure every door he thought was open would be locked, every account he thought was his would be empty, every piece of control he believed he had would vanish like smoke. She worked methodically, checking off items on a list she'd created weeks ago. Company dissolution documents, signed and filed. Investment portfolios, transferred to accounts Julian didn't know existed. Safety deposit boxes, emptied and closed. Insurance policies, beneficiaries changed. Even the small things mattered. The credit cards in his name canceled. The memberships to exclusive clubs he loved terminated. The luxury gym he bragged about, access revoked. Vivian erased him from every corner of the life they built, and she did it so quietly, so efficiently, that no one outside her legal team even knew it was happening. There were no public announcements, no social media posts, no confrontations. Just the silent, unstoppable force of legal authority working in her favor. On the 5th day, Vivian received a call from the real estate agent handling the house sale. "Mrs. Carlyle, the buyers are eager to move in as soon as possible. They're offering a bonus if we can expedite the move-out date." Vivian didn't hesitate. "Tell them they can have it in 3 days." The agent paused, surprised. "That's very fast. Will you have time to pack everything?" Vivian's response was calm and final. I'm not taking anything. The furniture, the decorations, everything stays. I just need my personal documents and clothes. The rest can go with the house. The agent stammered, clearly confused. Are you sure? Some of these pieces are very valuable. Vivian smiled to herself, a cold, knowing smile Julian would never see. They're not valuable to me anymore. Let the new owners enjoy them. She hung up and began packing. 1 suitcase for clothes. 1 box for documents. That was all she needed. Everything else, the furniture Julian lounged on, the art he pretended to appreciate, the kitchen where she made meals he barely acknowledged, none of it mattered. Those things were part of a life she was leaving behind, and she felt no attachment to any of it. That evening, Vivian sat in the living room one last time, a glass of wine in her hand, staring at the space that used to feel like home. The walls were covered with photos of her and Julian, smiling at events, posing at galas, looking like the perfect couple everyone believed they were. She stood, walked to each photo, and took them down one by one. She didn't tear them or throw them away. She just stacked them neatly on the coffee table, a silent monument to a marriage that never really existed. Her phone buzzed. A message from Julian. Can't wait to see you, babe. Be home soon. Miss you. Vivian stared at those words, her expression blank. He was still playing the role, still pretending, still convinced she had no idea what he'd been doing. She typed a response, short and simple. Safe travels. Then she set the phone down and returned to her packing. The next morning, her lawyer called with a final update. Everything's complete, Mrs. Carlyle. All assets are now under your sole control. The business is officially dissolved, and the funds have been transferred. The property titles are in your name only. He has no legal claim to anything. Vivian closed her eyes, letting the words sink in. What happens when he tries to access the accounts? The lawyer's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. He'll be locked out completely. Every login will fail. Every card will be declined. And if he tries to contest it legally, he'll be met with the messages you provided showing his intent to defraud you. He has no case. Vivian thanked her and ended the call. It was done. Julian's empire, the one he bragged about, the one he took credit for, the one he believed was his, no longer existed. 2 days before Julian's return, Vivian met with a moving company. Not to move her things, but to remove the last traces of her presence from the house. I need everything in this office packed and stored, she instructed, gesturing to the room where she'd spent countless hours building the business Julian claimed as his own. Documents, files, computers, everything. I want it done today. The movers worked quickly, and by evening, the office was empty. The desk where she signed contracts, the shelves filled with business books, the awards and certifications that bore her name, all of it was gone. The house now looked like a staged property, beautiful but soulless, ready for new owners who had no connection to the lies that filled its walls. Vivian walked through each room one final time, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. She felt nothing. No sadness, no regret, no attachment. This house was never really hers. It was a set piece in Julian's performance, a backdrop for the image he wanted to project. And now, that image was about to crumble. The day before Julian's return, Vivian checked into a hotel across town, a small, discreet place where no one would think to look for her. She sat on the bed, her suitcase beside her, and opened her laptop. One last task remained. She logged into her email and began typing. The letter wasn't long, but every word was deliberate, chosen for maximum impact. Julian, by the time you read this, you'll already know what I've done. The house is sold. The cars are gone. The company no longer exists. Every account we shared is now under my control. You have nothing because you never had anything to begin with. Everything you took credit for, I built. Every success you bragged about, I created. You thought I was weak, predictable, someone who would accept betrayal without resistance. You were wrong. I stayed silent not because I was afraid, but because I was planning. And now, you'll spend the rest of your life understanding the cost of underestimating the woman who gave you everything. Enjoy the future you chose. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. I always am. Vivian. She read the letter twice, checking for any trace of emotion, any hint of vulnerability Julian could use against her. There was none. Just cold, undeniable truth. She printed the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in an envelope. Then she arranged for it to be delivered to the house the day after Julian's return. She wanted him to walk in, see the emptiness, feel the confusion, and then read the words that would destroy whatever illusions he still held. Vivian closed the laptop and leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, Julian would come home, expecting to find his wife broken and submissive, ready to accept the humiliation he'd planned for weeks. Instead, he'd find nothing. No wife. No house. No business. No control. Just the cold, hollow reality that the woman he betrayed had dismantled his entire life while he was busy posting photos on a beach. And the lover he brought back, the woman he promised a future to, would see him for what he really was. A man with nothing. A man who built his identity on lies and other people's work. A man who lost everything because he never understood the value of the woman standing beside him. Vivian allowed herself a small smile, the first genuine one she'd felt in months. Julian thought he was coming home to deliver the final blow. He had no idea he was walking into his own destruction. She turned off the lights, closed her eyes, and slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Tomorrow, Julian's world will end, and Vivian's new life would finally begin. Julian's car pulled into the driveway at exactly 3 in the afternoon, the sun hanging high in a cloudless sky. Vivian watched from across the street, hidden behind the tinted windows of a rental car she'd parked 2 houses down. She told herself she wouldn't come, that watching his reaction wasn't necessary, that she'd already won and didn't need to witness his defeat. But something pulled her back, a need to see the exact moment his world collapsed, to watch the confidence drain from his face when reality finally hit him. Julian stepped out of the driver's seat, stretched his arms above his head, and smiled that same arrogant smile he'd worn in every vacation photo. The passenger door opened, and she emerged. Julian's ex-girlfriend, the woman he'd promised a future to, the woman he believed was worth destroying his marriage for. She was young, beautiful, and completely unaware of what was waiting inside that house. She clung to Julian's arm as they walked toward the front door, laughing at something he said, her voice carrying across the quiet suburban street. Julian pulled out his keys, the same keys Vivian had watched him pack 3 weeks ago, and slid one into the lock. It didn't turn. He tried again, jiggling the key, his smile fading slightly. "That's weird," he muttered. The woman beside him frowned. "What's wrong?" Julian forced a laugh, pulling the key out and examining it. "Lock must be sticky. Haven't been home in a while." He tried a different key, then another, his movements becoming more frantic with each failed attempt. None of them worked. The locks had been changed. Julian stepped back, staring at the door like it had personally betrayed him. "This doesn't make sense." The woman's voice carried a hint of concern now. "Maybe Vivian changed the locks while you were gone." Julian's expression shifted, confidence giving way to confusion. Why would she do that? He pulled out his phone and dialed Vivian's number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. He sent a text. "Vivian, I'm home. Why aren't the keys working? Call me." No response. Julian paced the front porch, his jaw clenched, his mind clearly racing through possibilities that didn't make sense. The woman stood awkwardly beside him, her earlier excitement replaced by visible discomfort. "Maybe we should go to a hotel and figure this out tomorrow," she suggested. Julian shook his head, his voice sharp. "This is my house. I'm not going to a hotel." He walked around to the side gate, tried to open it, but found it locked too. He peered through the front window, his hands cupped around his eyes to block the glare. What he saw inside made him freeze. The house was empty. Not just empty of people, but empty of everything. The furniture, the decorations, the art on the walls, all of it was gone. The living room that used to be filled with expensive couches and elegant lighting now looked like a vacant property waiting for new tenants. Julian stumbled back from the window, his face pale. What the hell? The woman rushed over, looking through the window herself. Julian, where's all your stuff? He didn't answer. He was already dialing another number, his hands shaking slightly. Mark, it's Julian. I need you to check something for me. Log into the company account and tell me the balance. There was a pause as he waited, his breathing shallow. The voice on the other end was confused. Julian, I can't log in. It says my credentials are invalid. Julian's voice rose, panic creeping in. What do you mean invalid? Try again. Another pause. I tried 3 times. Same message. It's like the account doesn't exist anymore. Julian ended the call without another word and immediately dialed his bank. The automated system greeted him cheerfully, asking him to enter his account number. He did, his fingers fumbling on the keypad. I'm sorry, but we cannot locate an account with that number. Please check your information and try again. Julian hung up and tried a different bank. Same result. Then another and another. Every account he tried, every login he attempted, every door he thought was open, all of them were closed. Locked. Inaccessible. The woman was staring at him now, her expression shifting from concern to something closer to fear. Julian, what's going on? He ignored her, scrolling frantically through his phone, trying to find some explanation, some contact who could tell him what was happening. Then he saw it. An email notification from an unfamiliar legal firm. The subject line read, Notice of Asset Transfer and Account Dissolution. Julian opened the email with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the legal language that filled the screen. Words jumped out at him. Emergency court order. Asset freeze. Evidence of intent to defraud. All joint accounts transferred to sole ownership of Vivian Carlisle. Property sold. Business dissolved. He read it twice, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. This couldn't be real. This had to be a mistake. Some kind of clerical error. He dialed the law firm's number listed at the bottom of the email. A receptionist answered on the second ring. Law offices of Carter and Klein. How may I direct your call? Julian's voice was barely controlled, rage and panic fighting for dominance. I need to speak to someone about an email I just received. There's been a mistake. A huge mistake. The receptionist's tone was professional but firm. May I have your name, please? Julian gave it, and there was a pause as she checked her system. Mr. Hart, I see your file here. I'm transferring you to Attorney Klein now. The hold music felt like an eternity. When the attorney finally picked up, his voice was calm and detached. Mr. Hart, I assume you're calling about the asset transfer documents? Julian's control finally snapped. What the hell is this? You can't just take everything I own. This is theft. This is illegal. Attorney Klein's response was measured, almost bored. Mr. Hart, everything that was done was completely legal and approved by a judge. Your wife provided substantial evidence that you were planning to fraudulently transfer marital assets without her knowledge or consent. The court granted an emergency order to protect those assets, and Mrs. Carlisle exercised her legal right to dissolve joint ownership. Since she was the original owner of all properties and businesses in question, the transfers were straightforward. Julian's voice dropped to something dangerous. She can't do this. I'll fight it. I'll take her to court. The attorney's response was almost sympathetic. You're welcome to try, Mr. Hart, but I should inform you that we have extensive documentation of your communications with another individual, detailing your plans to defraud Mrs. Carlisle of assets she built. Those messages alone would make any legal challenge nearly impossible to win. Additionally, you'll find that without access to funds, retaining legal representation will be difficult. Julian opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The attorney continued. Mrs. Carlisle has asked me to inform you that the house you're currently standing in front of has been sold. The new owners take possession tomorrow morning. You'll need to remove any personal belongings you may have stored there by tonight, though from what I understand, Mrs. Carlisle was quite thorough in her preparations. The line went dead. Julian stood there, phone pressed to his ear, staring at nothing. The woman beside him touched his arm gently. Julian? What did they say? He lowered the phone slowly, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. She took everything. The house. The business. The accounts. Everything. The woman's eyes widened. What do you mean everything? Julian's laugh was hollow, broken. I mean, we have nothing. No house to go to. No money to access. No business to run. Nothing. The woman stepped back, her expression shifting from sympathy to something colder. Wait. You told me you owned all of this. You said you built this empire. You said we'd have everything we needed. Julian turned to look at her, seeing for the first time the doubt creeping into her eyes. I did build it. Vivian just handled the paperwork, the logistics. I was the face of everything. The woman's voice was sharp now, accusatory. The face? Julian, if she took everything and the court sided with her, that means it was hers to begin with. You lied to me. Julian reached for her arm, desperation replacing arrogance. No, baby, listen. This is just a misunderstanding. We'll fix this. I'll call my lawyer, we'll fight this, and we'll get everything back. She pulled away from him, shaking her head. Your lawyer? With what money, Julian? You just said you have nothing. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in, and Julian could feel the ground disappearing beneath his feet. We can stay at a hotel tonight. Figure this out in the morning. The woman laughed, bitter and sharp. With what credit card? You just told me all your accounts are frozen. Julian's mind raced, searching for any solution, any way to salvage the situation. I have friends, people I've done business with. They'll help us. But even as he said it, he knew how hollow it sounded. The woman was already walking back toward the car, pulling out her phone. I'm calling an Uber. Don't contact me again, Julian. I don't date broke men who lie about everything. Julian watched her leave, standing alone on the porch of a house that was no longer his, holding keys that no longer worked. His phone full of contacts who couldn't help him. His accounts empty. His business gone. His wife vanished. And for the first time in his life, Julian Hart understood what it felt like to have absolutely nothing. Would you have stayed to watch him break down, or would leaving without a word have been more satisfying? Julian stood on the porch long after the Uber carried his ex-girlfriend away, staring at the door that wouldn't open, holding keys that meant nothing. The afternoon sun beat down on him, but he felt cold, a creeping chill that started in his chest and spread through his entire body. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't possible. Vivian was supposed to be the quiet one, the submissive one, the woman who smiled and accepted whatever he decided. She wasn't supposed to fight back. She wasn't supposed to win. But the empty house behind that locked door told a different story, one Julian was only beginning to understand. He pulled out his phone again, scrolling through contacts, searching for someone who could help him make sense of this nightmare. His business partner, his accountant, his financial advisor, anyone who had access to the empire he thought he controlled. He dialed Marcus, his business partner for the last 5 years, the man who helped him close deals and manage clients. Marcus answered on the third ring, his voice cheerful. Julian, welcome back, man. How was the trip? Julian's voice was strained, barely holding together. Marcus, I need you to check something. Try logging into the company portal right now. There was a pause, the sound of fingers typing on a keyboard. Okay, logging in now. Another pause, longer this time. That's weird. It's saying my credentials are invalid. Hold on, let me try again. Julian closed his eyes, already knowing what Marcus would say. Still not working. It's like my account doesn't exist anymore. What's going on? Julian's grip tightened on the phone. The company's gone, Marcus. Vivian dissolved it while I was away. The silence on the other end was heavy. She what? Julian, she can't just dissolve a company without your approval. You're listed as co-owner. Julian's laugh was bitter. Apparently she can. And she did. Marcus's voice shifted, concern replacing confusion. Have you talked to a lawyer? This has to be illegal. Julian wanted to scream that he'd already tried, that the lawyers told him he had no case, that everything Vivian did was perfectly legal. But admitting that out loud felt like admitting defeat, and Julian wasn't ready for that yet. I'm working on it. I just need to figure out where she is, what she's planning. Marcus hesitated before speaking again. Julian, man, I hate to ask this, but did something happen between you two? This seems pretty extreme. Julian didn't answer. He couldn't explain the photos he'd posted, the messages he'd sent, the plans he'd made to replace Vivian with someone younger and more exciting. He couldn't admit that his own arrogance had handed her the ammunition she needed to destroy him. So he said nothing, and the silence stretched between them until Marcus finally spoke again. Listen, I've got to go. Let me know if you need anything. The call ended, and Julian knew Marcus wouldn't be calling back. Nobody wanted to be associated with a man who'd just lost everything. He scrolled through his contacts again, stopping on his accountant's name. David had managed their finances for years, handling taxes, investments, and account transfers. If anyone knew what was happening, it would be him. Julian dialed, and David picked up immediately. Julian, I was just about to call you. We need to talk. Julian's stomach dropped. What's going on? David's voice was professional but tense. I received legal documents yesterday informing me that all accounts under Carlyle Enterprises have been frozen pending asset transfer. I tried calling you, but your phone was off. Julian's mind raced. Can they do that? Just freeze everything without warning. David sighed. If there's a court order, yes. And according to the documents I received, there is. Signed by a judge, approved by Mrs. Carlyle's legal team, completely legitimate. Julian felt the walls closing in. What does that mean for me? David paused, choosing his words carefully. It means you have no access to any funds, accounts, or assets tied to those businesses. Everything's been transferred to Mrs. Carlyle's control. Julian's voice rose, desperation bleeding through. But I built those businesses. I closed those deals. I brought in those clients. David's response was quiet but firm. Julian, I've been your accountant for 5 years. I know where every dollar came from. Mrs. Carlyle was the primary investor, the original owner, and the one who funded every expansion. Your name was added to accounts, but she was always the foundation. Legally speaking, she had every right to reclaim what was hers. The truth in those words hit Julian harder than any insult. He'd spent years believing his own lies, convincing himself that he was the architect of their success, when in reality he'd been nothing more than a figurehead. Vivian had built everything, and he'd just been along for the ride, taking credit, soaking up praise, and planning to abandon her the moment something better came along. David, I need your help. There has to be a way to fight this. David's tone shifted, becoming more distant. I can't help you, Julian. Mrs. Carlyle is my client now. She retained my services as part of the transition. I'm legally obligated to work in her best interests, not yours. Julian's world tilted. Even his own accountant had switched sides. You're serious right now? David's response was final. I'm sorry, Julian. But yes, I'm serious. If you need financial advice moving forward, you'll need to find another accountant. The call ended, and Julian stared at his phone, the screen blurring as reality crashed down around him. He had nothing. No house. No business. No money. No allies. Even the people he thought were his team had abandoned him the moment his power disappeared. He sat down on the porch steps, his head in his hands, trying to process the magnitude of what Vivian had done. She dismantled his entire life in less than 3 weeks, and she'd done it so quietly, so efficiently, that he never saw it coming. Every account he tried to access was locked. Every password he entered was wrong. Every person he called for help either couldn't or wouldn't assist him. The empire he'd bragged about on social media, the wealth he'd flaunted in vacation photos, the success he'd claimed as his own, all of it was gone. And the worst part was knowing that it was never really his to begin with. His phone buzzed. A notification from Instagram. Someone had tagged him in a post. Julian opened it, his heart sinking as he saw what it was. A screenshot of one of his vacation photos, the one where he and his ex-girlfriend were on the beach, smiling and holding champagne glasses. The caption read, "This didn't age well." The comments section was brutal. Guess his wife found out. Karma's real. He's about to learn what happens when you betray the wrong woman. She built everything, and he thought he could just take it. What an idiot. Julian scrolled through hundreds of comments, each one more humiliating than the last. People he didn't even know were dissecting his mistakes, celebrating his downfall, sharing the story of how Julian Hart, the man who had everything, lost it all because he underestimated his wife. He deleted the app, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. His reputation, the one thing he'd clung to even as everything else crumbled, was now as destroyed as his bank accounts. The sun was setting when Julian finally stood up, his body stiff from sitting on the cold concrete steps. He had nowhere to go. No hotel would take him without a working credit card. No friends would let him crash on their couch after hearing what happened. He pulled out his phone one last time and tried calling Vivian. It went straight to voicemail, just like the 20 times before. "Vivian, please. We need to talk. I know you're angry, but we can fix this. Just call me back. Please." His voice cracked on the last word, desperation and fear finally breaking through the arrogance that had defined him for so long. He hung up and stared at the house, the empty shell of a life he no longer had access to. Then he noticed something tucked into the doorframe. A white envelope. His name written on the front in Vivian's neat handwriting. Julian's hands shook as he pulled it out and tore it open. The letter inside was short, typed on plain paper, no emotion, no sentimentality, just cold, undeniable truth. "Julian, by the time you read this, you already know what I've done. The house is sold. The business is dissolved. Every account is locked. You have nothing because you never had anything to begin with. Everything you took credit for, I built. Every success you bragged about, I created. You thought I was weak, predictable, someone who would accept betrayal without resistance. You were wrong. I stayed silent not because I was afraid, but because I was planning. Enjoy the life you chose. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. I always am. Vivian." Julian read the letter 3 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. She wasn't angry. She wasn't vengeful. She was just done. And that finality, that complete dismissal of everything he thought they had, was more devastating than any confrontation could have been. He crumpled the letter in his fist, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. This was supposed to be his moment. He was supposed to come home triumphant, tell Vivian it was over, introduce his new girlfriend, and walk away with everything they'd built. Instead, he was standing outside a house he couldn't enter, holding a letter that confirmed his worst fear. Vivian had outplayed him. She'd seen through his lies, anticipated his moves, and dismantled his life with surgical precision. And she'd done it all without raising her voice, without making a scene, without giving him the confrontation he could have used to paint himself as the victim. She'd simply taken back what was hers and walked away. Julian sank to his knees on the porch, the letter still clutched in his hand. And for the first time in his adult life, he cried. Not because he loved Vivian, not because he regretted betraying her, but because he finally understood the cost of underestimating the woman who gave him everything. The front door opened suddenly, startling him. A man in his 50s stepped out, looking down at Julian with confusion and mild concern. "Can I help you?" Julian looked up, his face streaked with tears. "Who are you?" The man's expression shifted to understanding. "I'm the new owner. I take possession tomorrow, but I wanted to check the property tonight. Are you the previous owner?" Julian's voice was hollow. "I thought I was." The man nodded slowly, sympathy flickering across his face. "Well, you'll need to clear out. I'm sorry, but that's how it works." Julian stood, his legs unsteady, and walked away without another word. Behind him, the new owner closed the door, locking it with a soft click that sounded like the final punctuation on a life Julian no longer recognized. Julian spent the first night of his new reality in his car, parked in a grocery store lot 3 miles from the house he used to call home. The leather seats that once symbolized luxury now felt like a prison, cold and uncomfortable, a far cry from the king-sized bed he'd slept in just 24 hours ago. He tried calling hotels, but every credit card he entered was declined. He tried calling friends, but most didn't answer, and the few who did made polite excuses about being busy or out of town. By midnight, Julian understood something he'd never considered before. Without money, without status, without the illusion of power he'd carefully constructed, he had nothing. No safety net, no backup plan. No one was willing to catch him when he fell. He sat in the darkness, staring at his phone, scrolling through Vivian's social media accounts even though she'd blocked him everywhere. He searched her name on Google, hoping to find some trace of where she'd gone, some clue about what she was planning next. But there was nothing. Vivian had vanished completely, leaving behind only the wreckage of his life and a legal trail so airtight that even the lawyers he managed to reach told him the same thing. You have no case, Mr. Hart. Everything she did was legal. The next morning, Julian woke to the sound of someone tapping on his car window. A police officer stood outside, his expression stern but not unkind. Julian rolled down the window, his body stiff from sleeping in an awkward position. Morning, officer. The cop glanced at the expensive car, then back at Julian's disheveled appearance. You can't sleep here. This is private property. Julian nodded, too exhausted to argue. I understand. I'll leave. The officer studied him for a moment. You okay? Do you need help with something? Julian almost laughed at the question. How could he explain that he needed help with everything? That he'd lost his house, his business, his money, and his dignity in less than 3 weeks? I'm fine. Just had a rough night. The officer didn't look convinced, but he stepped back. All right, just move along. Julian started the car and drove away, no destination in mind, just movement for the sake of not sitting still. He pulled into a coffee shop parking lot and walked inside, ordering the cheapest drink on the menu with a last $20 in his wallet. The barista, a young woman with bright blue hair, smiled at him cheerfully. That'll be $4.50. Julian handed her a $5, and she gave him his change along with his coffee. He sat in a corner booth, wrapping his hands around the warm cup, trying to make sense of the past 24 hours. His phone buzzed. An email notification. The subject line read, Final notice, vehicle repossession scheduled. Julian opened it, his heart sinking as he read. The car he was sitting in, the luxury sedan he'd driven for 2 years, wasn't his. It was leased under the business account Vivian had dissolved. The leasing company was notifying him that the vehicle would be repossessed within 72 hours unless full payment was made. Julian's hands trembled as he calculated what full payment would mean. $38,000. Money he didn't have. Money he couldn't access. Money that existed in accounts Vivian now controlled. He was about to lose the car too. The one thing he had left, the only shelter he could claim, would be gone in 3 days. Julian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, drawing stares from other customers. He walked outside, climbed back into the car, and drove aimlessly through the city, his mind racing through options that didn't exist. He needed a lawyer, a real one, someone who could fight Vivian's legal team and reverse the damage she'd done. But every lawyer he called asked the same question. What's your retainer budget? Julian had no answer. Without access to funds, he couldn't afford even a consultation, let alone a court battle. By the third day, Julian was desperate enough to try something he swore he'd never do. He drove to his parents' house, a modest home in the suburbs where he'd grown up, the place he'd left behind the moment Vivian gave him access to a better life. His mother answered the door, her face lighting up with surprise. Julian, what are you doing here? He forced a smile, trying to appear casual. Just thought I'd visit. It's been a while. His mother ushered him inside, calling for his father, who emerged from the garage, wiping grease off his hands. Julian, good to see you, son. They sat in the living room, his parents asking questions about his trip, about Vivian, about the business. Julian deflected, giving vague answers, waiting for the right moment to ask for what he really needed. Finally, his father leaned back in his chair and studied him with the sharp eyes of someone who'd raised him and knew when something was wrong. "What's going on, Julian? You didn't drive all the way out here just to visit." Julian hesitated, pride and desperation warring inside him. "I need to borrow some money, just temporarily. I'm in between accounts right now, and I need some cash to cover expenses until things settle." His father's expression didn't change. "How much?" Julian swallowed hard. 50,000. Maybe more. The silence that followed was suffocating. His mother looked at his father, concern etched across her face. His father sighed, shaking his head slowly. "Julian, we don't have that kind of money. And even if we did, I'd want to know what happened first. Last I heard, you were running a successful business, living in a mansion, driving expensive cars. What changed?" Julian couldn't meet his father's eyes. "It's complicated." His father's voice was firm, then uncomplicated. Julian's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. Vivian left. She took everything. The house, the business, the accounts. "I have nothing," his mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. His father just stared, his expression unreadable. Why would she do that? Julian opened his mouth to lie, to spin some story that painted him as the victim, but the words wouldn't come. His father had always been able to see through him, and this time was no different. "You cheated on her, didn't you?" his father said, his voice heavy with disappointment. Julian's silence was answer enough. His father stood, walking to the window, his back to Julian. "I warned you about that girl. Told you she was too good for you. Told you that if you married her, you better treat her right because she didn't need you. You needed her." Julian's voice was defensive. "I built that business. I brought in clients. I closed deals." His father turned, his expression hard. "With her money. On her foundation. You didn't build anything, Julian. You just put your name on what she created. And now you're here asking us to bail you out because you threw it all away for some other woman." Julian stood, anger flashing across his face. "I didn't come here for a lecture. I came here for help." His father's response was cold and final. "Then you came to the wrong place. We can't help you. And honestly, after what you did to Vivian, I'm not sure we should even if we could." Julian's mother reached for his arm, her voice pleading. "Honey, don't be so harsh. He's our son." His father didn't budge. And Vivian was a good woman who deserved better. If she took everything, it's because she had a damn good reason. Julian made his choices. Now, he has to live with them. Julian walked to the door, his pride shattered, his last hope gone. "Thanks for nothing." His father called after him. "Julian, wait." He stopped, his hand on the doorknob. "Learn something from this. The world doesn't owe you anything. And the people who love you won't stick around if you treat them like they're disposable." Julian didn't respond. He just walked out, climbed back into the car that would be repossessed in less than 48 hours, and drove away. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Julian sat in a fast food parking lot, eating a dollar menu burger, his phone battery at 5%. He'd been checking his email obsessively, hoping for some miracle, some reversal, some sign that this nightmare would end. Instead, he found another message from Vivian's legal team. "Mr. Hart, as a final courtesy, we are informing you that all remaining personal effects stored at the former marital residence have been placed in a storage unit. You have 30 days to retrieve them before the unit is cleared and the contents disposed of. The address and access code are below. Please note that the storage fees have been paid in full by Mrs. Carlyle as a one-time courtesy. Any future fees will be your responsibility." Julian read the message twice, the clinical tone, the word courtesy, the fact that even in her final communication, Vivian was still taking care of details he couldn't manage himself. It wasn't kindness. It was a reminder, a message that said, "I'm still functioning, still organized, still in control, and you're not." He opened the storage unit address, memorizing it, knowing he'd have to go there eventually to salvage whatever scraps of his former life remained. But not tonight. Tonight, he just sat in the car, staring at the darkening sky, trying to remember the exact moment everything went wrong. Was it the first lie he told Vivian? The first trip where he prioritized his ego over their marriage? The first time he posted a photo meant to hurt her? Or was it earlier than that? Was it the day he convinced himself that he deserved the credit for her work, that his charm mattered more than her intelligence, that his presence was more valuable than her effort? Julian didn't have answers. All he had was the crushing weight of consequences he never thought would catch up to him. And somewhere out there, Vivian was living a life he'd never be part of again, free from the man who'd taken everything she offered and demanded even more. The legal reckoning was complete. Vivian had won, not through anger or revenge, but through precision and patience. And Julian was left with nothing but the knowledge that he'd destroyed the best thing in his life and would spend years paying for it. If you lost everything because of your own choices, would you accept responsibility or keep blaming others? The storage unit was located in an industrial complex on the edge of town, the kind of place where people stored things they couldn't bear to look at but weren't ready to throw away. Julian pulled into the gravel parking lot 3 days after receiving the email, his car running on fumes because he'd spent his last $10 on gas. The repossession notice had come and gone, extended by a single week due to some administrative delay, but Julian knew his time was running out. Soon, he wouldn't even have the car. He'd have nothing but whatever was waiting inside that storage unit, packed up by a woman who'd once promised to love him forever. The facility was quiet, rows of orange metal doors stretching in every direction, each one hiding someone's discarded life. Julian found Unit 247, entered the code Vivian's lawyers had provided, and pulled the door up. It rolled open with a metallic screech, revealing a small space packed with boxes, neatly labeled in Vivian's precise handwriting. Clothes, documents, personal items, photos, everything organized, even in abandonment. Julian stepped inside, the smell of cardboard and dust filling his nostrils. He opened the first box, finding his expensive suits, the ones he'd worn to investor meetings and galas, now folded and packed away like costumes from a play that had ended. He pulled one out, holding it up to the dim light filtering through the doorway. The fabric was still pristine, the tailoring still perfect, but wearing it now would feel like a lie. These suits belonged to a different man, someone who had power and confidence and a future. Julian had none of those things anymore. He moved to the next box, finding watches, cufflinks, designer shoes, all the accessories he'd accumulated during his years with Vivian. Each item had a story, a memory attached to it, but none of those memories felt real anymore. They were just props in a life he'd played at living, never understanding that everything he touched, everything he wore, everything he claimed as his own had been built on someone else's foundation. The third box was labeled documents, and Julian opened it with trembling hands. Inside were contracts, business plans, property deeds, all marked with red stamps that read void or dissolved or transferred. Vivian hadn't just taken everything. She'd documented it, organized it, and returned the evidence to him, so he could see exactly how thoroughly she'd dismantled his world. Julian pulled out a property deed for the house, the one he'd thought of as his mansion, his castle, his proof of success. The transfer documents showed Vivian's name as the original owner, with Julian added 2 years after purchase. He'd never been the owner. He'd just been living in her house, sleeping in her bed, and pretending it was his. Another document caught his eye, a business contract from the early days of their marriage. Vivian's signature was bold and clear at the bottom, next to a funding amount that made Julian's stomach turn. $200,000. She'd invested that money to start the business he'd spent years bragging about, the company he'd told investors he'd built from scratch. Julian had contributed nothing but his presence, his charm, his ability to talk a good game, while Vivian did the actual work. The truth was right there in black and white, undeniable and humiliating. Julian sank to the floor of the storage unit, surrounded by boxes that contained the remnants of a life he'd never actually owned. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from an unknown number. "Julian, it's Marcus. I heard what happened. Man, I'm sorry, but I can't be associated with this situation. The clients are asking questions, and I need to protect my reputation. I hope you understand. Good luck." Julian stared at the message, His jaw clenched. Marcus wasn't the first to distance himself, and he wouldn't be the last. In the weeks since Julian's world collapsed, former business partners, investors, and colleagues had all quietly severed ties, erasing him from their networks, their contacts, their lives. Success had made him popular. Failure made him invisible. Another text came through, this one from a number he recognized. His ex-girlfriend, the woman who'd walked away from him on that front porch. I saw the posts online. Everyone's talking about what happened. I can't believe you lied to me about everything. Don't ever contact me again. Julian didn't respond. What could he say? That he'd been lying to himself too? That he'd actually believed the empire was his? That Vivian was just support staff? That he could replace her and keep everything? The delusion felt pathetic now, transparent in hindsight. But in the moment he'd been so convinced of his own importance that he'd never questioned it. He scrolled through social media, something he'd been avoiding for days, and found that his name was trending. Not for success or achievement, but for failure. Articles had been written, blog posts published, Reddit threads created, all dissecting the story of Julian Hart, the man who thought he could betray his wife and keep the empire she built. The comments were brutal. He really thought he was the boss when she was doing all the work. Classic narcissist. Takes credit for everything, contributes nothing. His wife is a legend. She dismantled him without even raising her voice. Imagine being this stupid. He posted photos with his side chick and expected no consequences. Julian's face burned with shame as he read comment after comment, each one exposing a truth he'd spent years hiding from himself. He wasn't the genius entrepreneur. He wasn't the self-made success story. He was just a man who'd been lucky enough to marry someone brilliant and foolish enough to throw it all away. A notification popped up. Someone had tagged him in a video. Julian clicked on it, his heart sinking as he recognized the content. It was a compilation of his vacation photos with his ex-girlfriend, set to music, with text overlays mocking his arrogance. POV, you think you're the boss, but your wife built everything. He really posted this thinking he was winning. The day before his world ended. The video had 3 million views. 3 million people had watched his humiliation play out in real time, celebrated his downfall, and laughed at his mistakes. Julian's hands shook as he closed the app, but he couldn't unsee what he'd just witnessed. His failure wasn't private. It was public, viral, a cautionary tale shared across the internet for entertainment and moral instruction. He was no longer a person. He was a meme, a punchline, an example of what happens when ego outpaces intelligence. Julian sat in that storage unit for hours, surrounded by boxes that represented a life he'd never truly built, holding a phone that showed him a world that had moved on without him. No one was coming to save him. No one was offering second chances. The people who'd praised him when he had money now avoided him like he carried a disease. And somewhere out there, Vivian was living her life, free from the weight of a man who'd taken everything and given nothing in return. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the open door of the storage unit, Julian finally stood. His legs were stiff, his back aching, his mind exhausted from processing the magnitude of his loss. He grabbed a box labeled clothes and carried it to his car, knowing he'd need something to wear when he finally found a place to stay, wherever that might be. He made 3 more trips, loading boxes into the trunk and back seat, each one a reminder of what he'd lost. The suits, the watches, the photos of a marriage that had looked perfect from the outside, but was rotting from within. When the car was full, Julian stood at the entrance of the storage unit one last time, staring at the remaining boxes he couldn't fit. Personal items, photos, memories, things he didn't have room for, literally or emotionally. He pulled the door down, the metal clanging shut with a finality that echoed through the empty lot. As he drove away, his phone buzzed one more time. Another email from Vivian's legal team. Mr. Hart, this is to inform you that all legal proceedings related to the dissolution of marital assets have been completed. Mrs. Carlyle has requested that you cease all attempts to contact her, directly or indirectly. Any further communication should be directed through this office. Additionally, Mrs. Carlyle has instructed us to inform you that she wishes you well in your future endeavors and hopes you find the clarity and growth that this experience might offer. Julian read those words 3 times, each reading more painful than the last. Even now, even after everything, Vivian was taking the high road. No insults. No cruelty. Just a professional, distant message that treated him like a closed chapter in a book she'd finished reading. She wasn't angry. She wasn't hurt. She was just done. And that indifference, that complete emotional detachment, was more devastating than any confrontation could have been. Julian pulled into a motel parking lot, the kind of place that charged by the week and didn't ask questions. He rented a room with the last of his cash, a small space with stained carpet and a bed that sagged in the middle. This was his life now. No mansion. No luxury cars. No business empire. Just a motel room and a car full of boxes that reminded him of everything he'd lost. He lay on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and let the full weight of his humiliation wash over him. He'd thought he was untouchable. He'd thought Vivian was weak. He'd thought he could have everything, do whatever he wanted, and face no consequences. He'd been wrong about all of it. And now, alone in a motel room with nothing but his mistakes for company, Julian finally understood what Vivian had known all along. Power isn't loud. It isn't arrogant. It isn't about who talks the most or takes the most credit. Real power is quiet. It's patient. It's built through discipline and protected through intelligence. And when real power moves against you, you don't see it coming until it's already too late. Vivian had been that kind of power, and Julian had been too blind to notice until she'd already destroyed him. The humiliation was complete. The world had seen him fall. His reputation was ruined. His resources were gone. His future was uncertain. And the woman who'd made it all possible was somewhere far away, living a life he'd never be part of again. Julian closed his eyes, exhausted and broken, and wondered if he'd ever recover from the damage he'd done to himself. But deep down, he already knew the answer. Some mistakes cost more than money. Some betrayals destroy more than businesses. And some losses are so complete, so total, that recovery isn't just difficult. It's impossible. 3 weeks after Julian's world collapsed, he sat in that motel room, surrounded by the boxes he'd salvaged from the storage unit, trying to piece together some version of a future that made sense. The car had been repossessed 2 days ago, taken in the middle of the night while he slept, leaving him with no transportation and even fewer options. He'd applied for jobs, but his resume was a liability now. Potential employers would Google his name, find the viral posts about his downfall, and suddenly positions would be filled, interviews would be canceled, opportunities would evaporate before his eyes. The scandal had marked him, branded him as someone unreliable, untrustworthy, a cautionary tale nobody wanted on their payroll. Julian had spent hours staring at his phone, drafting and deleting messages to Vivian, trying to find words that could undo the damage he'd caused. But every apology felt hollow. Every explanation felt like an excuse. And he knew that even if he found the perfect words, she wouldn't read them. Vivian had made her position clear through her lawyers. She was done. Finished. Moving forward without looking back. And Julian was expected to do the same, to accept his losses and rebuild from nothing, just like he'd had nothing when they first met. The difference was that back then, he'd had hope. Now he just had regret. On a gray Tuesday morning, Julian walked to the motel office to pay for another week's rent with money he'd borrowed from a former college friend who'd taken pity on him. The manager, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, handed him his receipt along with an envelope. "This came for you yesterday." Courier dropped it off. Julian took the envelope, his heart racing as he recognized the law firm's logo in the corner. Another legal notice. Another document outlining what he'd lost. He walked back to his room, sat on the edge of the sagging bed, and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, not a legal document this time, but a personal letter. Vivian's handwriting, neat and precise, filled the page. Julian's hands trembled as he began to read. "Julian, I debated whether to write this letter at all. A part of me thought silence would be more powerful, that letting you wonder and guess would be the ultimate statement. But I realized I owe you nothing, not even my silence. So here are the words I'll say once, and then never again. When we met, I saw potential in you. I saw someone I could build with, someone I could trust, someone who would value partnership over power. I was wrong. You didn't want a partner. You wanted an audience. Someone to watch you perform, to applaud your wins, and to carry your losses while you took all the credit. I gave you everything, Julian. Not just money or property or business opportunities, but my time, my energy, my belief that we were building something together. And you took it all, convinced yourself it was yours, and then planned to discard me the moment someone more exciting came along. Julian's throat tightened as he read, each word landing like a physical blow. Vivian's tone wasn't angry or emotional. It was matter-of-fact, almost clinical, which somehow made it worse. She wasn't lashing out. She was simply stating the truth. The letter continued. I stayed silent for weeks while you posted photos with her, while you bragged about a future that didn't include me, while you made plans to take everything I built and share it with someone who hadn't earned it. I stayed silent because I was planning. And unlike you, I don't make plans based on emotion or ego. I make plans based on strategy and law. Every document I signed, every account I opened, every property I purchased, I did it knowing that someday I might need to protect myself from someone who didn't value what we had. I never thought that person would be you. But when I saw those messages, when I read your plans to humiliate me and take everything, I realized you never valued me at all. You valued what I could provide. And the moment you found someone you thought could provide the same things, you were ready to walk away. So I made it easy for you. I removed everything you thought was yours and showed you the truth. You never had anything. You just lived in the shadow of what I built and convinced yourself you were standing in the sun. Julian set the letter down, his vision blurring with tears he'd been holding back for weeks. He wanted to be angry, to find some flaw in her logic, some way to paint himself as the victim. But he couldn't. Every word she wrote was true. He'd taken her work, her intelligence, her patience, and treated them like they were his birthright instead of her gift. The letter wasn't finished. He picked it up again, forcing himself to read the rest. I'm writing this not for closure, because I don't need closure from you. I'm writing this so you understand something important. You didn't lose because I was smarter or more ruthless. You lost because you underestimated the woman who loved you enough to include you in everything she built. You thought my kindness was a weakness. You thought my patience was submission. You thought I would cry and beg and fall apart when you finally revealed your plan. But I didn't fall apart, Julian. I just stopped holding you up. And the moment I let go, you collapsed. That should tell you everything you need to know about who was really in control all along. The words hit harder than any insult could have. Vivian wasn't gloating. She wasn't celebrating his downfall. She was just explaining cause and effect, showing him the direct line between his choices and his consequences. The letter concluded with words that Julian would carry with him for the rest of his life. I don't hate you, Julian. I don't even think about you most days. You're just a lesson I learned about trusting people who haven't earned it. I hope you find whatever it is you were looking for when you decided I wasn't enough. I hope it makes you happy in ways I apparently never could. But more than that, I hope you learn something from this. I hope you understand that the people who build you up deserve better than betrayal. That loyalty isn't optional in a partnership. That love without respect is just exploitation dressed in nice words. I've moved on, Julian. I'm building a new life, one that doesn't include people who take more than they give. I suggest you do the same. But this time, try building something of your own instead of borrowing someone else's foundation and calling it yours. Don't contact me. Don't look for me. Don't try to explain or apologize or make amends. We're done. We were done the moment you decided someone else deserved the life I was giving you. Enjoy the future you chose. Vivian. Julian read the letter 3 times, each reading more painful than the last. There was no opening for reconciliation. No hint that she missed him or regretted her decision. Just finality, cold and complete, delivered with the same precision she'd used to dismantle his life. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, his hands shaking. Vivian had given him the closure she claimed not to need, and in doing so, she delivered the most devastating blow of all. She'd shown him that she was fine without him, thriving even. While he sat in a motel room with nothing, she was somewhere building a new empire, living a new life, completely unburdened by the man who'd tried to destroy her. Julian stood and walked to the small bathroom, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at him was unrecognizable, unshaven, exhausted, broken. This wasn't the confident entrepreneur who'd smiled for cameras and shaken hands with investors. This was someone who'd lost everything and had no one to blame but himself. He thought about the letter's final lines. Enjoy the future you chose. The cruelty of those words wasn't in their anger, but in their accuracy. Julian had chosen this. Every decision, every lie, every betrayal had been his choice. And now he was living with the consequences of choosing wrong. He walked back to the bed, sat down, and pulled out his phone. He wanted to call someone, to talk through what he was feeling, to hear a voice that didn't judge or dismiss him. But his contact list was full of people who'd already made their position clear. They weren't interested in helping him. They weren't interested in hearing his side of the story. They were just interested in distance, in separating themselves from his failure before it contaminated their own success. Julian opened his photo gallery, scrolling through images from better times. Pictures of him and Vivian at galas, at business events, at quiet dinners where they'd actually looked happy. Or at least, he'd looked happy. Looking at Vivian's face now, in these old photos, Julian could see something he'd missed at the time. She wasn't happy. She was performing, playing the role of supportive wife, hiding whatever doubts or frustrations she felt behind a practiced smile. How long had she been unhappy? How many signs had he missed because he was too focused on himself to notice? The questions didn't matter anymore. The answers wouldn't change anything. Vivian was gone, his empire was gone, and the future he'd imagined had evaporated like it never existed at all. Julian deleted the photos, one by one, watching the images disappear from his screen. Then he opened his social media accounts and deactivated them all. He didn't want to see the comments anymore, didn't want to read the articles dissecting his mistakes, and didn't want to be reminded of the person he'd pretended to be. That version of Julian Hart was dead. What remained was someone who had to figure out how to build a life from nothing, the way he should have done from the beginning, instead of riding on someone else's success. The motel room felt smaller now, the walls closing in, the weight of his mistakes pressing down on him. Julian lay back on the bed, Vivian's letter still clutched in his hand, and closed his eyes. Somewhere in the world, Vivian was free. Free from him. Free from the burden of carrying someone who refused to carry his own weight. Free to build whatever future she wanted without the man who'd only ever held her back. And Julian, for the first time in his life, was truly alone. Not because he had nothing, but because he'd thrown away everything that mattered. The letter wasn't just closure. It was a mirror, reflecting back the man he'd become and forcing him to see the truth he'd spent years avoiding. He wasn't the hero of this story. He never had been. He was the lesson, the cautionary tale, the example of what happens when ego outpaces gratitude and arrogance replaces respect. And now, with nothing left to lose and nowhere left to fall, Julian finally understood what Vivian had been trying to tell him all along. You can't build a future on someone else's foundation and expect it to hold when you walk away. Eventually, the foundation crumbles, and you're left standing on nothing at all. 6 months after Vivian dismantled Julian's world, she stood on the balcony of her new apartment overlooking the ocean. Coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The apartment was smaller than the mansion she'd sold, simpler, but it was entirely hers. Every piece of furniture she'd chosen herself. Every decoration reflected her taste, not a compromise between two people who'd never really wanted the same things. The silence in this space wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. For the first time in years, Vivian wasn't building for someone else. She wasn't managing someone else's ego or covering for someone else's mistakes. She was just living, breathing, existing in a space that demanded nothing from her except presence. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A message from her lawyer. "Good morning, Mrs. Carlyle. Just confirming that the final documents have been processed. All legal ties to your former marriage are now officially dissolved. You're free and clear." Vivian read the message twice, letting the words sink in. Free and clear. She'd been functionally free for months, but having the legal confirmation felt different. Final. Like closing a book she'd been reading for too long and finally placing it back on the shelf where it belonged. She typed a quick response. "Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without your team." The lawyer's reply came quickly. "You did the hard part, Mrs. Carlyle. We just handled the paperwork. Best of luck in your next chapter." Vivian set the phone down and returned to the balcony, her mind wandering to the question she'd been avoiding for months. What came next? The business she'd built with Julian was gone, dissolved and liquidated. But the money from that liquidation had given her options most people never had. She could retire, travel the world, live comfortably without working another day in her life. Or she could do what she'd always done. Build. Create. Turn ideas into reality and prove to herself that she didn't need anyone else to succeed. The choice wasn't difficult. Vivian had never been good at sitting still. Within weeks of leaving Julian, she'd started sketching plans for a new venture, something completely different from what she'd done before. A consulting firm that specialized in helping women protect their assets in business partnerships and marriages. She'd learned the hard way how vulnerable trust could make you, how easily years of work could be claimed by someone who contributed nothing. She wanted to make sure other women didn't make the same mistakes she had. The firm launched quietly, with no press releases or grand announcements. Just a simple website, a few strategic connections, and word of mouth from women who'd heard her story and wanted her guidance. Within 3 months, Vivian had more clients than she could handle. Women from all over the country reaching out for advice on protecting what they'd built from partners who didn't value it. Each consultation reminded Vivian why she'd left. Every story she heard echoed her own experience. Brilliant women building empires while their partners took credit. Hardworking women funding lifestyles for people who contributed nothing. Patient women enduring disrespect because they believed love meant sacrifice. Vivian listened to each story with the same calm attention she'd brought to her own situation, and then she helped them plan. Legal structures, asset protection, exit strategies. Everything they needed to reclaim control of their lives and their work. One afternoon, Vivian met with a new client, a woman named Rachel, who reminded her painfully of herself 5 years ago. Rachel had built a successful tech startup, brought her husband in as co-founder, and watched as he slowly took over the narrative, telling investors and media that he was the visionary while Rachel was just the operations person. "I built the product," Rachel said, her voice trembling with frustration. "I wrote the code. I designed the interface. I pitched the first investors. But now everyone thinks it was his idea. And he's starting to believe it himself." Vivian leaned back in her chair, her expression calm but understanding. "Does he have legal ownership?" Rachel nodded. "We signed everything jointly. I thought we were partners. I thought he valued what I brought to the table." Vivian pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. "We can fix this. It won't be fast and it won't be easy, but we can protect what's yours and make sure he can't take credit for work he didn't do." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to hurt him. I just want him to acknowledge what I've done." Vivian's voice was gentle but firm. "I understand that. But you need to understand something too. People who take credit for your work aren't going to give it back voluntarily. You have to take it back yourself. And that means being willing to make hard decisions, even if they feel cruel." Rachel wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. "You did this, didn't you? I read about what happened with your husband. Everyone's talking about it." Vivian smiled, thin and knowing. "I did. And I don't regret it for a second." Rachel leaned forward, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Do you ever miss him? Even a little. Vivian considered the question carefully before answering. I miss the idea of him. The person I thought he was when we first met. But the real him? The man who took everything I gave and demanded more? No, I don't miss him at all. The conversation with Rachel stayed with Vivian long after the consultation ended. She'd been asked that question before by clients, friends, and even her own family. Do you miss him? Do you regret what you did? Do you wish things had gone differently? And every time, Vivian's answer was the same. No, she didn't miss the man who'd betrayed her. She didn't regret protecting what she'd built. And she didn't wish for a different outcome, because the outcome she'd created had given her something more valuable than any marriage or business ever could. Freedom. The freedom to build without worrying someone would take credit. The freedom to succeed without sharing glory with someone who didn't earn it. The freedom to walk away from situations that no longer served her without guilt or hesitation. That freedom was worth more than anything Julian had ever brought to her life. Vivian's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello. The voice on the other end was hesitant, uncertain. Vivian? It's Marcus. Julian's old business partner. Vivian's expression didn't change. I remember you, Marcus. What can I do for you? Marcus cleared his throat. I wanted to apologize. I knew what Julian was planning. I saw the messages, heard the conversations, and I didn't say anything. I should have warned you. Vivian's voice was cool, detached. Why didn't you? Marcus hesitated. Honestly, I thought it wasn't my place. I thought you two would work it out, or that you'd figure out on your own. I didn't realize how bad it was until everything fell apart. Vivian let the silence stretch for a moment before responding. You were right about one thing. I did figure it out on my own, and I handled it on my own too. Marcus's voice carried a note of admiration mixed with regret. You really destroyed him. I've never seen someone lose everything so completely. He's working at a car wash now, living in some tiny apartment, completely off the grid. Vivian felt nothing hearing that. No satisfaction. No guilt. Just indifference. That's not my concern anymore, Marcus. Julian made his choices. I made mine. Marcus tried again. Look, I know this is asking a lot, but Julian's struggling. I'm really struggling. He's got nothing left. I was wondering if maybe you could. Vivian cut him off, her voice firm. No. Whatever you're about to ask, the answer is no. Julian is an adult. He made decisions that cost him everything, and now he's learning to live with those decisions. That's not my responsibility to fix. Marcus sighed. I understand. I just thought maybe. Vivian interrupted again. Marcus, let me be very clear. Julian spent years taking credit for work I did, planning to leave me with nothing, and treating me like I was disposable. When I found out, I protected myself using completely legal means. I don't owe him anything. Not my help, not my sympathy, and certainly not my money. If you want to help him, that's your choice. But don't call me again asking me to clean up the mess he made. She hung up before Marcus could respond, her hand steady, her heart calm. The old Vivian might have felt guilty, might have wondered if she'd been too harsh, might have considered helping just to prove she was the bigger person. But the new Vivian understood something the old one hadn't. Being the bigger person didn't mean absorbing other people's consequences. It meant setting boundaries and holding them, even when it felt uncomfortable. Marcus's call was a reminder that Julian's story wasn't over. He was still out there, still dealing with the fallout of his choices, still learning lessons he should have learned years ago. But that was his journey now, not hers. Vivian had closed that chapter, sealed it, and moved on to writing new ones that didn't include him at all. That evening, Vivian sat at her desk, reviewing proposals for her expanding consulting firm. She had offers to speak at conferences, requests for interviews from business publications, invitations to join boards and advisory committees. Her reputation had grown not despite the scandal with Julian, but because of it. Women across industries saw her as someone who'd stood up for herself, protected what she'd built, and refused to be diminished by someone else's ego. She'd become a symbol of quiet power, proof that you didn't need to be loud or dramatic to be strong. You just needed to be smart, patient, and willing to act when the moment came. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from her sister. Saw your interview in Forbes. So proud of you. Dinner this weekend. Vivian smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. Her family had been worried when the divorce happened, afraid she'd be devastated or broken. Instead, they'd watched her thrive, building something new and better than what she'd left behind. The dinner with her sister that weekend was warm and easy, filled with laughter and stories about the new business, the new apartment, the new life Vivian had created. You seem happier, her sister observed over dessert. Lighter somehow. Vivian nodded. I am. I didn't realize how much weight I was carrying until I put it down. Her sister reached across the table, squeezing her hand. I'm glad you're okay. I was so worried when everything happened. But you handled it perfectly. Vivian squeezed back. I handled it the only way I knew how, with a plan and the patience to see it through. Her sister laughed. That's always been your strength. You don't react. You respond. And your responses are always devastating. Vivian smiled, not with cruelty, but with satisfaction. Only when necessary. As Vivian drove home that night, the city lights glowing around her, she thought about legacy. Not the legacy she'd tried to build with Julian, the empire they were supposed to create together, but the legacy she was building now, on her own terms, with her own vision. A legacy of intelligence over emotion, strategy over impulse, boundaries over blind trust. She'd learned the hard way that not everyone deserves access to what you build. That some people will take everything you offer and still demand more. That love without respect is just exploitation wearing a prettier name. But she'd also learned that losing everything can sometimes be the best thing that happens to you. Because once you've lost it all and survived, you realize you never needed any of it to be whole. You were whole all along. You just didn't know it yet. Vivian pulled into her parking spot, turned off the engine, and sat in the quiet for a moment. Somewhere out there, Julian was learning the same lessons she'd learned, just from a much harder position. She didn't wish him well. She didn't wish him harm. She just didn't think about him at all. And that indifference, that complete emotional detachment from the man who'd once been the center of her world, was the truest sign that she'd moved on. Not just from Julian, but from the version of herself who'd needed someone else to feel complete. The woman sitting in that car, staring up at her apartment building, was someone new, someone stronger, someone who understood that the greatest power isn't the power to control others. It's the power to walk away from anything that doesn't serve you, no matter how much you've invested, and build something better in its place. Vivian got out of the car, locked it behind her, and walked toward her building. Behind her, the past faded into darkness. Ahead of her, the future glowed with possibility. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Vivian wasn't afraid of what came next. Because whatever came next, she'd handle it the same way she'd handled everything else. With intelligence, patience, and the unshakable knowledge that she was capable of building empires with or without anyone's help. That was her legacy. Not the businesses she'd created or the wealth she'd accumulated, but the quiet, devastating power of a woman who knew her worth and refused to settle for anything less. And that legacy would outlast any marriage, any betrayal, any man who'd ever underestimated her. Julian had been a chapter in her story, but Vivian was writing the whole book. And this time, she was writing it alone, which was exactly how it should be. If you were starting over with nothing, would you have the strength to rebuild, or would the weight of your mistakes be too heavy to carry? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to subscribe to the channel.